some 30 years ago, I went into sermons from the early 3rd century into the 19th century, dealing with this story of the Samaritan. And I find out that most preachers, when they comment that passage, comment it in order to show how we ought to behave towards our neighbor. Where in fact, this is the opposite of what Jesus, who tells that story of the Samaritan, wanted to point out. The Pharisees came to ask him, "Master, teacher, tell us, who is my neighbor?" They didn't ask him how does one behave towards neighbor. They asked him point blank the question, who is the guy whom you call neighbor? And he, as a story told them, a man was going down to Jericho, fell among the robbers, was beaten up, and left wounded. A teacher goes by, a priest goes by, sees him, and walks on. And then that outsider comes along, the traditional enemy, and turns over to him. There's an internal turning, and picks him up, takes him into his arms, and brings him to the inn. So he answers them, "My neighbor is whom I decide, not whom I have to choose." There is no way of categorizing who my neighbor ought to be. This doctrine about the neighbor, which this guy Jesus brings into conversation, is utterly destructive of ordinary decency, of ethical behavior. And to say this today is as surprising as it was at the beginning. What is revealed to us in the parable of the Samaritan is this. When we ask him, "Who is my neighbor?" he answered, "He to whom you, as a free human being, establish your personal proportionality by turning to him in love and inviting to mutuality of love, which one usually calls friendship." The Samaritan made me understand that I am I, in the deepest and fullest sense which is given to me to be I, precisely because you, by allowing me to love you, give me the possibility to be correlative to you, to be proportionate. I see, therefore, in love, hope, and charity, the crowning of the proportional structure in the full old sense, the proportional nature of creation. Nothing is what it is except because convenit. It fits. It is in harmony with something else. And I am free to choose with whom, or better, to accept from whom I want, from whom I let myself be given the possibility of loving. The Samaritan, therefore, the call of the Samaritan, charity, agape, does not destroy, but elevates proportionality onto a level which formerly was not perceived. It goes beyond Plato and Aristotle and beyond the Greek mysteries. It says your telos, your end purpose, the goal of your being is your choice of charity.
The story of the Samaritan, Illich says, elevated proportionality to a new height. He used the same term earlier in relation to the idea of contingency, which, he said, elevated nature to a new, if fragile, dignity as God's continuous creation. And the same, he argues finally, can be said of the Christian view of the body, which is implied in the doctrine of the resurrection of the dead. It makes possible the destruction of traditional body images, but it is, in itself, a glorification of the body. His text is a scene described in the Acts of the Apostles, in which the Apostle Paul preached the resurrection of the body to an assembly of Athenians.
Paul gave this speech which seemingly appealed to Athenians, the most civilized people, as I would say. The agora was, well, I'm speaking really as a adoptive New Yorker, something like Washington Square. In its best moments, people listened to him with great enthusiasm about Jesus, about his death on the cross, but when he wanted to speak about the resurrection of the dead, and somebody told him, for today it was enough, come another time and tell us about this. Paul speaks about something which even the Athenians don't want to listen to. Come back another time. They were delicate people, decent people, well-educated people. And yet, we believe in the resurrection of the body, of Christ's ascension, the popular devotion to a body of Mary physically taken into heaven, so common that a modern pope believed that on the basis of the commonness of the devotion he could say that it is a part of Christian belief, demanded from those who lived in that culture a respect in front of their body as a mystery which in a way went beyond, but in a way also destroyed all the different kinds of old body images or perceptions which were culturally determined differently in different cultures. We have now these marvelous studies by Mrs. Ruth Padel, P-A-D-E-L. Where did they feel their minds? They could hand the Greek heroes, they could take it in their hand. Their liver, their courage could push them on. These body cultures, if you want to say so, have been, surprisingly, in our Western culture, replaced or overshadowed is a better word. They've been overshadowed by the respect for the body, which is Christ's body. And once that disappears, a void space was left into which you couldn't put any construct.
The reluctance of Paul's Athenian audience to follow him in his discussion of the resurrection certainly shows their awareness of how potentially destructive such a teaching might prove to their traditional sense of the density of their own flesh. And yet, Illich says, the resurrection also created a new respect for the body, a new sense of the splendor and dignity of flesh that was destined for resurrection. Where corruption enters is through the very delicacy and fragility of these ideas. The idea of contingency, which asserts God's care at every instant of existence, collapses into an assertion of human sovereignty, and the resurrected body of Christ, when it is no longer experienced as comprehending all bodies, leaves what Illich calls a void space, an absence in which no body can be made to fit.